Hello everybody and welcome to 3 Colours Up with myself, John. In this one we're going to be carrying on from our vlog where we were 3D printing from Heroes Infinite. We were printing Marquita Mendoza and we showed you how to set the printer up, how to print the miniature, how to clean the miniature, and now we are now painting the miniature. So there's not really a lot to explain in here because it's kind of a one-off sort of let's just see what happens, or let's just see what we can do with the 3D printed model. And it's not the first 3D print I've painted, definitely not, but having changed printers since the last one that I did, which was from One Page Rules, the quality is different. The quality is night and day in both print quality and model quality. They're just great. So sit down, relax, and enjoy the show. So to begin with, what we're going to be doing to the miniature is picking out one colour at a time and just getting some base coating down. So for the first thing we're going to be doing is the cloth. Now, I'll grab a brush here to point. She has a lot of clothing on, only really her forearms up to the elbow and her face are actually bare skin. Everything else has a covering of some sort. She seems to be wearing sort of tight leggings with these belts over here, and then she has like an undershirt that comes up to the sort of like leather. I want to call it a bra, but it's kind of like a half corset or something like that. And then up over onto this sort of jacket that she has going on. So what I want to do is take one colour and do everything that is going to be that one colour. And for all this cloth here on her leggings and her body there, I'm going to be going with a bit of a strange colour choice actually. German Camouflage Beige, the World War II one. We're going to be using a lot of Vallejo in this because I want her to have that sort of steampunk explorer kind of feel with a few of these big flourishes of brass and metals, but I want the clothing itself to look quite simple. So running with a simple beige or a simple sort of khaki colour is going to give us that sort of quite basic, simple base coat that we want. And let's get a better, well, let's just use this brush for now. And we're not using a wet palette this time, we're just going with it because a few people have been saying, you know, why are you using a wet palette if you're not batch painting? Which is a very good point. So it also means I'm forced to use all the paint here. Now, this is just going to be a case of going over every detail we want to have this beige colour on. And once we have that done, we're going to come back and see where we go next. At this point now we have the beige down on everything that I'm looking to do in that colour. So we have her trousers, we have this shirt up here, we have her helmet, which is like that typical explorer's helmet, and we also have the belt for the ammunition for the machine gun. Now I'm doing it in this style because historically old-timey machine guns before the invention of sort of metal joining link, had a canvas strip, 2 canvas strips that allowed the rounds to fit into. And I thought, you know, it'll fit quite well with this. It's a bit of old tech with sort of fantasy-esque sort of nature to it. So that's kind of where my thinking is with the model so far. Now moving on to the next colour, we're going to be using some Vallejo Cavalry Brown, and we're going to be using that for her boots. And only for her boots, because what I want to do with these is to show that they are well worn, well used, and also a different kind of leather to what everything else is going to be. I want her to have a bit of variation in some of the material that she's wearing. So the plan is to do this sort of red leather or red browny leather, but then cover it in a contrast paint so that we get sort of a bit of a red tinge showing through. You know, just to represent the material wearing and, you know, settling in over time. So we're going to get some of this out of the bottle. That's a little bit too much there. In fact, that paint's a bit thin, so give it a bit of a shake. And we'll try that again. We'll go further over here. It looks a bit more realistic there. And as before, we're just going to give the boots a coat of that colour. Now it's not going to look great right now, but once we get it all settled in, it should look a bit more interesting. Want to make sure we get everything there because the laces are going to go a different color, and this top ridge here is going to go a different color as well. Sort of fold it over top to the boot. So with our cavalry brown now down onto our boots, we've left the heels out there because we're going to be painting them a different colour later on, or probably actually this step, because we're going to move on to Vallejo chocolate brown. And this one, this colour, we're going to use to paint the top of our boots, this fold down piece, and all the other leather gear, the belts, the top of her corset, the strap for her goggles. We're going to do all of that now. We're going to be leaving out the water canteen, and we're leaving out the jacket as well. So we're going to be doing some chocolate brown next, and this is just going to be a case of, again, just careful base coating. We're going to have to be a little more careful than we were previously now because we are working around items that have already been painted. So for example, on the top of our boot, just catch that edge. Put a bit more water on my brush. And a bit more paint on it too. So we want to do that. We'll paint in the heel and the sole of the boots. We'll do this strap, these two belts, this bottom part of her corset here, and probably these two buckle buttons on her little jacket as well. So we'll just push on with this, and when we come back we'll see what this looks like and what our next step will be. So with our brown leather down, let's have a look around the miniature and see what we've done. So it's just some basics. We've done the soles and the heels for the boots, the upper part of the boot, and we've done most of the leather work that she's wearing, including the strap around her helmet there to hold her goggles in place. So, and we've also done the corset as well. She does have the upper part of her chest is bare, so we're going to have to get in there with a small brush when we get to our skin tones, which is going to be our next step. So with that said, we're going to move on to some Vallejo heavy skin tone, and then we're going to give all that skin a base coat with this. This is a good paint. It's got a high pigmentation on it. If you've not seen the game color heavy stuff, it's kind of like the old Games Workshop foundation paints. High pigmentation and goes down really nicely. So we're going to give all her skin a coat of this now and see what we get as we move on. So while we're waiting for the skin to dry, we're going to move on to some bright colors here. We're going to move on to brass. And what we're going to be doing with that is basically base coating the weapon, this supporting arm, and we're going to paint in the back end of all the cartridges that are in the belt. So this again, just another base coating step, and we're just going to paint the whole thing in because then we can detail up the weapon later on with different colors. So it's just going to be a matter of being as careful as we can. And we'll probably maybe need more than one coat to get a good finish on the brass. With the brass applied, now our heavy skin tone is dry. So we're going to move on to our next layer on our skin, which is going to be Citadel's Kislev flesh. This is really just a little bit of a highlight, and we're going to use it before we put anything else on, because we're going to be toning the skin down. But we want to bring the skin up a little bit first. So what I'm planning on doing is just using the Kislev flesh just to bring up some of her muscle tone and just sort of a little bit of general highlighting just to make her look a little more interesting and a little more highlighted. So we're going to do this across all the skin that we can get to, and then after that I think we'll probably either move on to some metallics or we'll move on to some more of her clothing. With the skin highlighted with our Kislev flesh, let's just have a little look at what we've done. And it's really just picking out, particularly on this arm, you can see the muscle tone sort of a little bit more visible. Similar story on the other arm, just a little less apparent. There's not as much muscle tone there. And on her face, we've really just done the cheekbones. So the two cheekbones and the forehead and the bridge of the nose. So not really a lot, but just enough to get a little bit more interest on the miniature. So from there, we're going to move on to camouflage olive green, and we're going to use that for the shirt that she has on here. So we're going to get some water onto our brush and just play with that on the palette a little bit. And then it's just going to be a case of, again, maybe 1 or 2 coats of this to just get at least this base layer onto the cloth. So with a little bit of a tidy up step as well, we've got the green down, it's nice and dry. We've also done the water canteen. What I've also realised is that she was actually wearing fingerless gloves, so I've painted them in the same brown as the rest of the leather on both arms, and I think we're ready to move on. So what we're going to be moving on to is a dark metal, and for that we're going to be using Citadel Iron Warriors, and we're going to be using this on the unpainted parts of the weapon. We're going to pick out a few parts as well, just to add a bit more variation to the colour. And we're also going to paint the tips of the bullets. So for example, on the supporting arm here that she has on, we want to do all these parts here. This little bit underneath this part of the arm, these connectors up here, and then we also want to paint the tips of the bullets. So make them nice and dark so that when we come to highlight them later on, they'll be a bit more interesting looking. So with another layer down, our Iron Warrior stuff, our Iron Warrior painted items look really good. I like that dull contrast, that darker metal against the brass. I've also went in and painted the ringlets on the boots. Probably not the best job I've ever done. The bullets look fantastic on the belt, and the little details on the gun just make it look a little more interesting. I've also done the cap for the canteen and the 2 snappers, or the 2 poppers that hold that closed. What I'm also going to do next is get a little bit more of a skin tone going on, but on the inside of the mouth. We're going to make that a little bit darker now. And I think after that, we're probably in a position to start to, well, we're going to do that, and then I'm going to put a lighter colour onto her laces. We'll probably do that, maybe a light brown or a cream colour, maybe the same colour as the pants, maybe a different one. But first off, we're going to do the inside of the mouth, and for that we're going to use Bugman's Glow, because again, it's a nice deep skin colour, and it should fit our use or our needs. So get a little bit of that and put it onto the palette. And this is just going to be a case of, you'll not see it on that camera, so we'll look at this one. There's maybe a little bit too much paint on the brush there. You can see it's filled the space a little bit too much. That should be fine. So once that's dry, we'll be able to get in and paint the teeth, but we'll be painting the teeth after a step where we're going to be doing a lot of washes. So onto her laces, I think we're going to pick Ulthuan Grey for this one and make them nice and bright. And again, once we have a wash down, it should settle that colour a little bit better. And hopefully this paint isn't too thin, although it may be a little thin. But we'll do this, and then when we come back, we'll be pretty much ready to prepare the miniature for a step for washes, or we need to get a little bit of wood in there as well. So we'll do a nice dark brown in there. With our Ulthuan grey now down, what I've done is painted the laces. I've also painted the stripe on either side of her pants, and I think up here as well we've done the little bits of I can't remember what you would call them, but they have the buttons on one side, and on the other side they'd just be blank because they have slits for those buttons to buckle up. And is there anything else? I don't think there's anything else. Just the laces and those parts. I also went back in with my Iron Warriors and did the 2 buttons on her jacket there, and also did some woodwork here on the base of the weapon, which is Rhinox hide, so just a very simple dark brown. Now at this point, we're almost ready to do a wash step, but before that we need to prep for the wash, and we're going to be using some Ardcoat for that, which is our gloss varnish from Citadel, and we're going to be giving the whole miniature a coat of this. So we're just going to take it straight from the cap. I don't want to contaminate it by putting it onto my palette. And this is just going to be a case of giving the whole miniature a coat of this. And then once that's dry, we can start applying our wash. With the gloss varnish now down and dry, obviously she's quite glossy. So we're going to be going on to our wash step now, which is going to be Cryptek Armourshade Gloss, another Citadel wash. And we're going to be using that with a little bit of water on the brush, and we're going to run that over the whole miniature. If you haven't used Cryptek before, it is a very heavy wash, so you do need to water it down quite a bit. Preferably with Lamian medium, but water is going to do fine for our uses here. So let's just start to apply that over the whole miniature. Let it, with the aid of the gloss varnish, let it naturally get into all the areas that we want. And once this is done, we can look at maybe a matte varnish and then start some highlighting. So now we have our wash down. She's still glossy, obviously, because our wash is a gloss, but we are getting some interesting tone, and we're getting a little bit of shading, or quite a lot of shading to be fair. So at this stage, we're going to matte varnish her down, and then at that point we can start working on highlighting. We're not going to do the hair until one of the last steps, I think. I think that's the best way to go about it. So for our matte varnish, we are using the AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish. This is really, really good stuff. I can't get enough of it. And we're going to be airbrushing it. So we've got a little bit of thinner in our airbrush. Not a lot. It's mostly just a little bit of regular acrylic thinner, just to make sure that the layer is smooth. So we're going to turn the airbrush on. Make sure it works. And then it's just going to be a case of giving the entire model a light coat. With the matte varnish now down, we can see just how interesting this miniature actually is. I think she looks really good now with the shading and this matte varnish particularly. And you know, it shows you the ability of a regular sort of very affordable 3D printer, and the quality of miniatures that Heroes Infinite provide. You can get some really cool and interesting looking miniatures without a lot of hassle. So at this stage, we're going to be moving on to our highlighting steps. Now the highlighting steps, we're not going to make them too complicated here. We're going to take every base color that we've used and just lightly highlight every piece that we have. So for instance, we're going to start back with our Cam Olive Green, and we're going to do a little bit on her jacket. So It's really going to be a case of carefully going over every color and just picking out areas that we want to highlight. So let's just make sure this is ready. And what we want to do is just take this base color and just reapply it over all the upper surfaces, and that should just bring a little bit of vibrancy back into the model as we highlight everything up. So that's what we're going to be doing now. We're going to go over every color, and once we have that done, we'll come back and then we'll have hair, face details, and maybe a couple of little bits and pieces. So with the the highlight slash tidy up step basically done, we can see that she's a little bit cleaner than she was just after the matte varnish, and there's just a bit more depth to certain aspects of her. The metallics always work really well when you re-highlight or when you go over the matte varnish with the same color. It always brings out a little bit more sheen, or brings the sheen back to certain parts of those elements. So what we're looking at now is we're going to start working on her hair, and we're going to go blonde, and the initial coat for that is going to be Vallejo Dark Sand. So I've not tried this as a base for a blonde, but it definitely feels like a color that should work. So as always, we're going to start base coating, and we'll see how we get on with that. So this will take a little bit of time as well, and maybe more than one coat, so we're just going to work at it and build up a nice base. With the base coat down for the hair, I also went in with some more Ulthuan grey and tried as best I could to get the eyes, at least one colour into the eyes. Again, guys, I am really not that good an eye painter. I don't practice them enough. I prefer miniatures with full face helmets, to be fair. So from this point, we're going to start to colour our hair a little bit. And for this, I'm going to use a contrast paint, Nazdreg Yellow. We're going to try and keep the hair a little simple. So we want to give it a coat of this to dirty down and shade a little bit before we start to dry brush and highlight our way back up again. So we'll put some water onto the brush, and let's get a bit of our Nazdreg ready. So hopefully this should work. So let's start applying it. You can see this is going to be quite a vibrant finish as well. It's going to be a very bright yellowy finish with some nice shading in there, which is perfect because we want this to really form the shadows within the hair, so that when we come to highlight it all back up again, it's going to look a little more subtle than it does right now. But we're still going to have that strong, deeper shade in there. Plus it is already just very striking as it stands. So let's get this down, let it dry, and see what our next step will be after this. So with the contrast paint now down, I've also went in with a little bit of blue, which in this case was the Scale 75 Hiril blue, and painted in some irises there. I had to do the left eye again, so it's probably not the best, but it gives her a face and a bit of an expression, so yeah, okay. So what we're going to be doing now is going back to our base dark sand, and we're going to be going over the hair again, but in this case it's going to be as a dry brush. So I'm hoping that the paint I still have on the palette is good enough and we can start to apply this dry brush. I think we're good. So let's see. And this is going to be the method of bringing the hair to make it look a little cleaner, and should allow us to call the hair finished once we have this all down. So with our dry brush done, we can have a look and see that, in my opinion, this is a really nice, striking hair color. I think that we've really got something that contrasts really well against her more sort of drab appearance. So as we're rounding in on the end, I'm going to pick out a couple of places that I want a little more highlighting. So what I'm planning to do is, let me see here if I can just pick the colors down here. I'm going to take a little bit of Vallejo Russian uniform, and we're going to highlight her jacket a little more. And then after that, I think I'm going to go with something for her other clothes. See if I can find an appropriate one here. Possibly a little bit of Ushabti bone, and we're going to use that to highlight the pants and the helmet. I think those are the two areas that I really want a bit more highlighting in. I think everything else is pretty much where I want it to be. So at this stage, same highlighting process as before. We're going to go in and just tidy up things a little bit, add a little bit more highlighting, and I think that should just about do it. What I will do before we go off camera to do that highlighting though is take a little bit of Soulstone blue, and we're going to just put that very quickly into the lenses on our goggles, simply because it works really well as dark glass, and it should look pretty decent. So again, just a case of dabbing a bit of it into those lenses. Get a little bit more on my brush. Take a bit off there because that's a bit too much. I think that ought to do it for that. So we'll get on with the two highlighting steps here, the two highlight colors. And once we've done that, we'll have a look around the miniature and then go and paint the base. And I think that is going to be our little character finished. So with our final highlighting done, the miniature herself is basically finished. All I want to do now is just quickly go and paint the base up so that we have something to frame her with. And then I think she'll be all done and we can check her out properly with everything done. And we can see what a 3D printed miniature from Heroes Infinite actually looks like completely finished. So yeah, let's see what happens. I'm just going to experiment with the base and see what I come up with. And we'll see you on the other side of that. And here we are. We have our lady all finished and ready to kick some ass in what feels like a bit of an Indiana Jones meets steampunk sort of aesthetic here. I wanted to make sure I painted the base because throughout the 3D printing part, this base was part of the miniature. So as you know, I usually don't paint the bases, but because this is part of the whole thing, it felt important to have that detail done as well. Just painted with a few basic paints, a little bit of dry brushing and some pigment powders, just to tone it all in a bit. And I think we have a very charming looking miniature in the end. I'm quite proud of this one, even though as usual my faces and eyes aren't great. I really like how the clothing and the skin tone has turned out, and I particularly like her hair as well. It's quite striking. I was tempted to make her a redhead, but decided against that. I wanted the blonde to be a much brighter finish. But I hope you've enjoyed this one. I hope you've enjoyed seeing it going from a 3D file through production and now through painting as well. So if you have any questions or any comments, please do leave them down below. Always like to see what you guys say. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Take care and see you again very soon.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.